Maria was the kind of woman people often overlooked. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, and she wasn't the sort who demanded attention. She was simply a mother, trying her best to raise her little boy in a world that seemed determined to make everything harder than it had to be. Every day she woke up before the sun, packed lunches, got her son ready for school, and then hurried off to one of her two jobs. She never complained, even though she was always tired. Her smile, soft but worn, carried the quiet weight of someone who had learned how to survive on very little. Her son, Daniel, was only 10 years old, but he understood more than most children his age. He could see how hard his mother worked. He could hear the sighs she tried to hide when she sat down late at night with sore feet. He noticed the way she stretched a small paycheck to cover rent, bills, food, and clothes. He knew she skipped meals sometimes just so he wouldn't have to. And though he never said it out loud, he promised himself one day he would repay her for everything she had done. Life for them wasn't glamorous. They lived in a small apartment on the edge of town, with thin walls that let in the sound of traffic and arguments from neighbors. The paint was chipped, the carpet was old, but Maria kept it spotless. She always said, "We may not have much, but what we do have, we will take care of." That was her way of holding on to dignity, of making sure Daniel understood that pride didn't come from money, but from effort and love. Still, Maria couldn't hide from the way people judged her. She felt it in the glances from strangers when she paid for groceries with coupons. She heard it in the tone of teachers who subtly suggested she wasn't involved enough at school because she couldn't attend every meeting while working double shifts. Worst of all, she felt it in her encounters with the police in her neighborhood. They seemed to see her not as a mother working hard, but as someone suspicious simply because she was struggling. One evening, after finishing her late-night shift at a diner, Maria picked Daniel up from her sister's house. It was close to midnight and the streets were quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only one awake in the world. Maria was exhausted, her body heavy from hours of carrying trays and standing on her feet. But she was glad to finally be driving home with Daniel, who was curled up in the back seat half asleep, clutching his backpack like a pillow. The drive should have been peaceful, but halfway home, flashing red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. Her heart sank. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a light. Still, she pulled over, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Two officers approached the car. One of them tapped sharply on her window. Maria rolled it down and offered a polite smile, though her nerves made it hard to keep steady. "License and registration," the officer said flatly. She handed them over quickly. "Of course, officer. Is something wrong?" Instead of answering directly, the officer shone his flashlight into the car, his beam landing on Daniel in the back seat. "It's awfully late for a kid to be out," he said. "Where are you coming from?" Maria swallowed, forcing her voice to stay calm. "I just finished work. I picked up my son from my sister's place. We're heading home." The second officer leaned closer, his tone sharper. "At this hour? That doesn't sound very responsible, does it? What kind of parent drags a child around past midnight?" The words stung. Maria wanted to explain that she had no choice, that Bills didn't care if she was tired, that her job wasn't something she could just quit because of the hours. But she could see from their expressions that they weren't interested in her truth. They had already judged her. Daniel, now fully awake, sat up straighter. He looked at his mother with worry, sensing her discomfort. The officers continued their questioning, pressing her as if she had done something wrong. They hinted about calling social services, about whether Daniel was being cared for properly. Each word chipped away at Maria's composure, making her feel smaller and smaller. Inside, she was furious. But fear was stronger. She had heard stories of mothers losing their children because someone misjudged them, stories of women of modest means being treated as if poverty equaled neglect. She didn't want to argue and risk making things worse, so she nodded politely, answered their questions carefully, and hoped it would end soon. But every second felt like an eternity, with Daniel's wide eyes watching from the back seat. After what felt like forever, the officers finally handed her back her documents. "Drive safe," one said, though his tone carried no warmth. They walked away, leaving her shaken. Maria started the car again, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. She could feel tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. She didn't want Daniel to see her cry. Not tonight. Not after everything, but Daniel was already looking at her with concern. "Mom," he said softly, "why were they so mean to you?" "You didn't do anything wrong." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him it was nothing, that everything was fine. But she couldn't lie to him. He was old enough to understand unfairness when he saw it. She glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her eyes heavy with sadness. "Sometimes people don't see who you really are," she whispered. "They only see what they want to see. And sometimes, that's enough for them to treat you badly." Daniel frowned, his small hands balled into fists on his lap. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood one thing clearly. His mom was being treated unfairly, and he didn't like it. Not one bit. The rest of the drive home was silent, but in Daniel's young heart something had shifted. He had always looked at his mother as strong, unshakable. Tonight he saw her vulnerability. He saw the way she swallowed her pain to protect him. And he felt a new determination growing inside him, even if he didn't yet know what he could do. By the time they reached their apartment, Maria was drained. She tucked Daniel into bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered goodnight. When she finally sat down on the edge of her own bed, the tears she had been holding back finally fell. She cried quietly, her face buried in her hands, not wanting to wake her son. What Maria didn't know was that Daniel, still awake, heard the soft sound of her sobs through the wall. His heart ached, and though he was just a child, he wished he could protect her the way she always protected him. That night planted a seed in Daniel's mind, a seed of courage that would soon grow into something neither of them could have imagined. For now, though, all he could do was listen, remember, and silently promise that one day he would find a way to make things right for his mom. The next few days after that night felt heavier than usual for Maria. She kept replaying the moment in her head, the flashing lights in the mirror, the harsh voices of the officers, and the way Daniel had looked at her from the back seat. It wasn't the first time she had felt judged, but this one stayed with her longer. Maybe it was the way they threatened to call social services, or maybe it was the way her son had seen her so powerless. Either way, the sting refused to fade. Maria tried her best to push forward like always. She went to work at the diner, forcing a smile for customers, keeping her tone warm, carrying trays with aching arms as though nothing had happened. But when she came home and closed the door behind her, the smile fell. Alone in the silence of her apartment, she let her shoulders drop and her mind wander to the fear that one day, someone might misunderstand her life so badly that they could take Daniel away. The thought chilled her to the bone. Daniel, on the other hand, carried the memory differently. Children have a way of holding on to things in their own unique way. He didn't speak about it often, but he thought about it all the time. On the bus ride to school, in the cafeteria, even while doing his homework, he could see the image of his mother sitting behind the wheel, trying so hard not to cry. He could hear the sharpness in the officers' voices, see the way they had looked at her, as if she were guilty of something when all she had done was work hard for him. That image burned in him, and it didn't go away. One evening, Maria was rushing to get to her second job. She was tired, but she still made sure Daniel had dinner ready and his homework checked. As she slipped on her shoes and reached for her bag, Daniel suddenly asked, "Mom, do they think you're a bad mom?" The question froze her in place. She turned slowly and looked at him, her heart sinking. "Why would you say that, sweetheart?" "Because of those cops," he said quietly. "They talked like you were doing something wrong. But you're not. You work so hard. You're the best mom." Maria felt her throat tighten. She knelt in front of him and held his small hands in hers. "Listen to me," she said softly. "You should never think that. I love you more than anything in this world, and everything I do, every late shift, every long day, it's for you. Sometimes people don't understand that. Sometimes they judge before they know the truth. But you know who I am, right?" Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, you're my mom, and you're the best mom." Her eyes watered, but she smiled. She hugged him tightly before leaving for work, the words echoing in her mind long after. But even though she reassured him, deep down she knew his question came from a place of worry. He had seen her treated unfairly, and it had left a mark on him just as it had on her. A week later, something similar happened again, though smaller. Maria had gone grocery shopping late at night, as she often did after work, because prices were a little cheaper then and the store was quieter. As she carried her bags to the car, a police car slowly drove past the parking lot. The officers didn't stop her. but she noticed the way their eyes followed her. She wasn't doing anything wrong, but she still felt judged. That feeling of being watched, of being sized up without reason, sat in her chest like a stone. She didn't tell Daniel about this time, but he could sense something. Children often know more than adults realize. He noticed how she grew quiet, how she looked over her shoulder more often, how she seemed to sigh a little deeper at night. He hated seeing her like that. At school, while other kids talked about video games and weekend plans, Daniel sat quietly thinking. He thought about how unfair it all was. Why didn't people see his mother for who she really was? Why didn't they see how hard she worked, how kind she was, how she never gave up? One Friday night after Maria's late shift, she picked Daniel up again from her sister's house. It was late, maybe close to midnight. This time Daniel sat awake in the back seat, watching his mother drive. Her face looked so tired in the glow of the streetlights, her hands gripping the wheel tightly as if bracing herself for something. He realized then that every time she drove late at night she was afraid. Not of the dark, not of the empty streets, but of the lights that might flash behind her again. Daniel felt anger, but more than that, he felt responsibility. He was just a child, but he wanted to protect her. He wanted to do something, anything, to make life fair for her. That night, as Maria tucked him into bed, Daniel looked at her and whispered, "One day, Mom, I'm going to help you." "I promise." Maria smiled tiredly, brushing his hair back. "You already do," she said. "Every day." She kissed his forehead and turned off the light. But as Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, he knew he meant more than just helping with chores or behaving in school. He meant something bigger. He didn't know how yet, but the promise burned inside him. A few days later, a community event was held in their neighborhood park. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small gathering with free food, music, and a few local officials shaking hands and smiling for photos. Maria didn't really care for such things, but she took Daniel anyway, thinking it might be good for him to play outside and enjoy the evening. Daniel wandered around, curious about everything. He noticed a man standing near the stage, shaking hands with people. He looked important, surrounded by others in suits. The crowd whispered that it was the mayor. At one point, the mayor made a short speech about listening to the people, about making the town safer and fairer. Daniel didn't understand all of it, but one thing caught his attention. Near the end, the mayor said, "If you ever feel unheard, if you ever feel like nobody is listening, I want you to know you can always reach out to me. I'll do my best to respond." He even held up a small stack of cards and passed them out. Daniel tugged at his mom's sleeve. "Can I have one?" Maria chuckled softly, surprised, but she let him take one of the cards. Daniel slipped it carefully into his pocket like it was treasure. Maria didn't think much of it. To her, it was just another speech by another politician, but Daniel held on to that card with quiet determination. He didn't know when or how, but something inside him told him this card could be important one day. And he was right, because only a short time later, when Maria once again faced unfair treatment, that little piece of paper in Daniel's pocket would become the key to something bigger than either of them expected. The night that changed everything started like any other. Maria was working her usual late shift, moving quickly from table to table at the diner. Her back ached. Her feet were sore, but she kept smiling at customers, refilling coffee cups and carrying plates with practiced balance. It was almost midnight when she finally clocked out, collected her tips, and stepped into the cool night air. She was exhausted, but she still had one more thing to do: pick up Daniel from her sister's house. The drive was quiet. The streets were nearly empty, just a few cars passing by now and then. Maria's eyes stung with tiredness, but she kept going, thinking only of getting home, tucking her son into bed, and finally resting. When she reached her sister's place, Daniel was waiting at the door with his small backpack. His face lit up when he saw her, even though it was late and he had been fighting sleep. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, climbing into the back seat. "Hi, sweetheart," Maria replied, giving him a tired smile. "Ready to go home?" He nodded and buckled himself in. The car hummed along the road, and within minutes the rhythm of the ride made Daniel's eyes grow heavy. He leaned against the window, drifting between sleep and wakefulness. Maria glanced at him in the mirror, her heart softening. No matter how hard the day had been, seeing him safe always gave her strength, but halfway home the peace was broken. Red and blue lights flashed behind her car. Maria's chest tightened instantly. Not again. She slowed down and pulled over, her hand shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Two officers approached, just like before. Their tone was sharp, their questions quick. "Why are you out so late? Where are you coming from? Who's in the back seat?" Maria explained, just as she had before. She told them about her job, about picking up her son, about heading home. But instead of understanding, their faces hardened with suspicion. They made comments again about the hour, about whether Daniel should be out, about whether she was really fit to be a mother. Daniel, half awake at first, soon realized what was happening. His heart pounded as he sat up and watched his mom being spoken to as if she had done something wrong. He saw the way her hands trembled on the wheel, the way her eyes shone with unspoken fear. One of the officers leaned closer, his voice low and cold. "You should think about the choices you're making. If this keeps happening, social services might get involved. You don't want that, do you?" Maria's throat went dry. She wanted to argue, to shout that she was doing everything right, that she was only working to provide for her child. But she bit her tongue. The last thing she wanted was to make the situation worse in front of Daniel. Finally, after what felt like forever, the officers let her go. They handed back her papers, gave a warning look, and walked away. Maria started the car again, her eyes burning with unshed tears. The road ahead was blurry for a moment, but she forced herself to stay calm. Daniel stared at her from the back seat. His mother, the strongest person he knew, looked so small behind the wheel. He wanted to say something, but his voice caught in his throat. Instead, he clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. He couldn't understand why they treated her this way. She was the kindest person he knew. Why couldn't they see it? When they finally got home, Maria parked the car and sat in silence for a moment. She didn't move, didn't speak. Daniel leaned forward. "Mom?" She wiped her eyes quickly and turned to him with a faint smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're home now. Go get ready for bed," but Daniel didn't move. He just looked at her, his chest tight with frustration. "It's not okay. They shouldn't talk to you like that. You didn't do anything wrong." Maria closed her eyes, her heart aching. She wanted to tell him the truth, that sometimes life wasn't fair, that sometimes people judged without reason. But she didn't want him to carry the weight she carried. "I know," she whispered finally, "but we'll be fine. Don't worry." Later that night, after Maria tucked Daniel into bed, she sat alone at the kitchen table staring at her hands. They were rough from years of hard work, lined with small cuts and burns from the diner. She felt tired, tired in her body, tired in her soul. The idea of losing her son, even by a misunderstanding, haunted her. She leaned her head on the table and let the tears fall quietly. What she didn't realize was that Daniel was still awake. Through the thin walls of the apartment, he could hear her soft sobs. He lay in bed, his eyes wide in the dark, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. He wanted to help her, but what could a 10-year-old do? He turned onto his side and felt something hard in his pocket. He reached in and pulled out the small card he had been keeping, the one the mayor had given out at the park. He held it in his hand, staring at the printed phone number. He remembered the mayor's words. "If you ever feel unheard, reach out to me. I'll do my best to respond." Daniel sat up slowly, his heart racing. Could he really call? Would anyone even listen to him? He looked toward the kitchen where his mother was still quietly crying and his chest tightened. He thought about the way the officers had spoken to her, about the way she had swallowed her pain, about the way she carried so much without complaint. In that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. If nobody else would stand up for his mom, he would. Even if he was just a kid, even if his voice was small, he was going to try. Daniel waited until his mom finally went to bed, the apartment settling into silence. He slipped quietly out of his room and picked up the old phone that sat on the kitchen counter. His hands shook as he dialed the number on the card. To his surprise, someone answered. A man's voice on the other end said hello. Daniel froze for a second, his throat dry, but then the words spilled out. "Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm 10 years old. I need to tell you something about my mom." The line was quiet for a moment, then the voice softened. "Go ahead, son. I'm listening." Daniel's words came out in a rush. He told the story exactly as he had seen it. The late nights, the police pulling them over, the way they spoke to his mother, the way she cried when she thought he wasn't listening. His voice shook with emotion, but he didn't stop. He wanted them to know his mother wasn't a bad person. She was the hardest working, most loving mom in the world, and she didn't deserve to be treated that way. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Daniel held his breath, worried maybe he had done something wrong. But then the voice on the other end spoke again, firm but gentle. "Daniel, thank you for telling me this. You're very brave, and I promise you, I'm going to make sure your mother is treated with the respect she deserves." Daniel's heart pounded. He couldn't believe he had actually spoken up. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, he felt like someone had really listened. He hung up the phone quietly, tiptoed back to his room, and slipped under the covers. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, a small smile spread across his face. He didn't know how, but he believed things were about to change. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for his mother too. What Daniel couldn't know then was that his small act of courage, that late-night phone call, would soon set in motion something much bigger than either of them imagined. The next morning, Maria woke up like any other day, unaware of what Daniel had done the night before. She stretched her tired arms, made coffee, and started preparing breakfast before waking her son for school. To her, it was just another day she had to push through, another day to keep her head down and keep working. She didn't know that far away, in a neat office, the mayor himself was thinking about her. Daniel had gone to school with a secret buzzing inside him. He wanted to tell his mom that he had called the mayor, but something in him told him to wait. He wasn't sure if she would be upset or proud, and he didn't want to risk her being worried. So he kept it to himself, sitting through math lessons and lunch breaks with his mind racing, wondering if anyone would really do something about his late-night phone call. That afternoon, Maria's phone rang while she was folding laundry. She almost didn't answer, thinking it was another bill collector, but when she picked up, the voice on the other end surprised her. "Good afternoon. This is the mayor's office. May I speak with Maria?" Maria froze, the basket of clothes slipping slightly from her hands. Yes, this is she." The woman on the phone continued, her tone polite but serious. "The mayor would like to meet with you. He heard about a concern involving local officers and wants to speak directly. Could you come to City Hall tomorrow?" Maria's heart raced. She almost laughed nervously, thinking it had to be a mistake. I don't understand. Why would the mayor want to see me?" The woman replied simply, "Because your story matters." Maria agreed, though her voice trembled. After she hung up, she sat on the couch in disbelief. She had never spoken to anyone that important before. What story? How did they even know about her? When Daniel came home, she told him the news. His eyes lit up, but he tried to keep calm. "That's good, Mom. Maybe they'll listen now." She gave him a puzzled look. "But how? How would they even know?" Daniel hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Mom, I called him. The mayor. I told him what happened with the police. I told him how they talked to you and how you cried when you thought I wasn't listening. I didn't want you to go through that anymore." Maria's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. For a moment, she didn't know whether to scold him or hug him. She knelt down, looking into his nervous eyes. "Daniel, you did that?" He nodded, his small voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I just wanted someone to help you." Tears filled Maria's eyes. She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "Oh, sweetheart, you're braver than I ever was. Thank you." The next day, Maria dressed carefully for the meeting. She didn't have fancy clothes, but she wore her cleanest blouse and pressed slacks, wanting to look presentable. Daniel begged to come along, and though she was unsure, she finally agreed. She knew he deserved to be there after all. He was the reason this was happening. Walking into City Hall felt intimidating. The tall glass doors, the polished floors, the busy staff rushing around. It was a world far removed from her small apartment and late-night shifts. But Daniel held her hand tightly, his little presence giving her courage. When they were finally led into the mayor's office, Maria's heart pounded. The mayor stood up from behind his desk and walked toward them with a warm expression. "Maria? And this must be Daniel." Maria shook his hand nervously. "Yes, sir." The mayor knelt slightly to meet Daniel's eyes. "You're the one who called me, aren't you?" Daniel nodded, his cheeks flushing. "Yes, sir. I just wanted you to know what happened to my mom. She didn't deserve it." The mayor's face softened. "You did the right thing, son. You were very brave to speak up." He turned to Maria. "You've raised quite a remarkable boy." Maria's chest swelled with both pride and embarrassment. I didn't even know he called. I was shocked when your office reached out, but thank you for listening." The mayor gestured for them to sit. As they did, he leaned forward on his desk. "I want to hear everything, from the beginning. Tell me exactly what happened with the officers." Maria hesitated, but then she spoke. She told the story of both nights, the stops, the questioning, the threats about social services, and the way she felt judged and powerless. Her voice shook at times, but she kept going, encouraged by Daniel's hand squeezing hers under the table. When she finished, the mayor sat in silence for a moment, clearly troubled. "Maria, I'm so sorry you went through this. No parent working hard to provide for their child should be made to feel like a criminal. This is not how our officers should behave. I promise you we're going to take action." Maria blinked, almost unable to believe his words. "Action?" He nodded firmly. "Yes, there will be an internal review. I'll speak directly with the police chief, and I want you to know you are not alone. No one should ever feel afraid when they see flashing lights on their way home from work." Daniel's eyes widened with hope. "So, you'll make sure it doesn't happen again?" The mayor smiled gently. "That's the goal. And it's because of you, Daniel. You made sure your mother's voice was heard." Maria's eyes welled up again. She turned to her son, overcome with gratitude. She had always thought of herself as his protector, but here he was, protecting her in the most unexpected way. After the meeting, the mayor's office arranged for Maria to be updated on the investigation. Word spread quietly through the community that something was happening at City Hall, that complaints about mistreatment were finally being taken seriously. Neighbors who had once shrugged at injustice began to whisper with hope. For Maria, the change didn't happen overnight. She still worked long shifts, still stretched every dollar, still carried her quiet strength through each day. But something inside her was different now. She didn't feel as invisible. For the first time, she felt like someone in power had truly seen her, truly listened. And every time she looked at Daniel, she saw not just her little boy, but the courage that had brought her voice into the light. He had done what even she had been too afraid to do. He had believed her worth was undeniable, and he made others see it too. That night, as they walked home together from the bus stop, Daniel slipped his hand into hers and said softly, "See, Mom, I told you I'd help you one day." Maria squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, and you already did. More than you'll ever know." But deep down, she did know. Her son's single phone call had started something bigger than both of them, something that was only just beginning. The days after the meeting with the mayor felt different for Maria. Life was still busy, still full of long shifts and bills that never seemed to rest. But there was something new. Hope. She carried herself a little taller now, knowing that someone had finally listened. She wasn't invisible anymore. More importantly, she knew that her son's voice had power, and that thought alone gave her strength. A week later, Maria received another call from the mayor's office. This time, it wasn't just about hearing her story. They told her that the officers involved had been pulled in for questioning and that the department was opening an internal review. The mayor wanted her to know personally that the process was already moving forward. Maria listened in stunned silence. She had never expected her life, her struggles, to reach the desk of the city's leader. When the call ended, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Daniel, sitting nearby doing homework, looked up curiously. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked softly. Maria shook her head quickly, smiling through the tears. "Nothing's wrong. For once, something's right. They're actually doing something about what happened. They're listening, Daniel." To us, Daniel's eyes lit up. He jumped from his chair and wrapped his arms around her. "See, Mom? I told you calling him was a good idea." She hugged him back tightly, her heart overflowing with pride. "Yes, sweetheart. You were right. You were so brave." Word spread quietly in the neighborhood. People began to talk about Maria's story, about how a little boy had stood up for his mother and how the mayor himself had responded. Other parents who had once felt powerless began to feel a spark of hope. If Maria and Daniel could be heard, maybe they could too. A few weeks later, Maria received another call. This time she was invited to attend a community meeting where the mayor would be announcing new policies for the police department. Nervous but curious, Maria agreed. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt unfairly treated. When she and Daniel arrived at the community center, the room was buzzing with people. Neighbors, parents, and local leaders filled the chairs. Maria felt out of place at first, clutching Daniel's hand tightly. But when the mayor spotted them, he smiled warmly and motioned for them to sit near the front. The meeting began with the mayor speaking about fairness, respect, and accountability. He explained that no one in the community should feel targeted or humiliated for simply living their lives. Then, he made an announcement that sent a ripple through the crowd. All officers in the city would be required to undergo new training focused on empathy, respect, and understanding, especially in situations involving families and children. Maria felt her breath catch in her throat. She squeezed Daniel's hand, overwhelmed. The mayor continued, saying that the changes were inspired by the courage of a young boy who had spoken up when he saw his mother treated unfairly. He didn't mention Daniel by name, but everyone in the room knew who he meant. People turned to look at Maria and Daniel, their faces filled with admiration. Maria's cheeks burned with emotion, but Daniel sat a little straighter, his small chest puffed with pride. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to them. One woman said, "You gave us courage." "Thank you." Another man nodded at Daniel and said, "You're braver than most adults I know." Maria could barely speak. She just smiled and nodded, tears shining in her eyes. That night, as they walked home under the streetlights, Daniel looked up at his mother. "Mom, does this mean no one else will get treated like you were?" Maria paused, thinking carefully. "It means fewer people will. It means they'll think twice before judging someone unfairly. And that's because of you, Daniel. You made them listen." Daniel smiled, satisfied. Then it was worth it. Back in their apartment, Maria tucked him into bed and sat beside him for a moment. She brushed his hair back gently. "You know, I always thought I was the one protecting you. But that night, you protected me. You showed me that even the smallest voice can be powerful when it speaks the truth." Daniel yawned, his eyelids growing heavy. "I just didn't want them to hurt you, Mom." Maria kissed his forehead. "And you didn't let them. You made things better. Not just for me, but for a lot of other families, too." As Daniel drifted off to sleep, Maria sat quietly in the dim room, watching him breathe. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. The weight she carried didn't vanish. She still had bills, work, and the daily grind. But she no longer felt completely alone in her fight. She knew that one phone call made by the tiny hands of her son had set something powerful in motion. In the weeks that followed, Maria noticed small changes. Police officers in her neighborhood seemed more cautious in their tone, more respectful in their approach. She even overheard one of them greeting a young mother kindly at the grocery store, offering to help with her bags. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. One evening, as Maria and Daniel sat on their small couch eating dinner together, she looked around their modest home and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride not just in surviving, but in having made a difference. She smiled at her son, who was busy talking about his day at school, and thought to herself, "This little boy is my greatest gift, my greatest strength." Daniel looked up and caught her staring. "What?" he asked with a grin. Maria laughed softly. "Nothing. I'm just proud of you." Daniel's grin grew wider. "I'm proud of you too, Mom." They both laughed, the sound filling the small apartment with warmth. Maria knew life would never be perfect. There would always be challenges, always struggles to face. But now she also knew that change was possible, that voices, no matter how small, could shake walls and open doors. She would never forget the night her son's courage lit a fire in their lives, a fire that spread beyond their little family and touched the entire community. And as she kissed him goodnight that evening, Maria whispered softly, "You saved me, Daniel. You truly saved me." Daniel, already half asleep, murmured back, "We saved each other." In the quiet that followed, Maria smiled through her tears. She realized that this wasn't just their story anymore. It had become a story of resilience, love, and the simple truth that even in the darkest moments, the pure heart of a child could shine a light bright enough to reach the highest office in the city.